And we are live. So, welcome to the second episode of the CFG Tech Forge podcast. I am your host for the evening, Ned, aka Dynamo Ned. And I'm joined this evening by Jason.
Hello.
And by Hunter.
Hey.
And we have some interesting tech news that's cropped up in the week since our last episode, plus a couple of show topics. We're going to talk about AMD's Ryzen Threadripper 2 and the rumors around the 2990X, and also about all the news around NVIDIA's Turing GeForce GPUs that show signs of releasing soon, TM.
Mm-hmm.
So before we jump into all the tech news and everything, just like to ask, what's everyone been up to in the past week or so? Any interesting hardware projects or anything unusual happening?
I'll let Hunter go and then I can go.
No, I've just been watching YouTube videos for tech people, a lot of Gamers Nexus stuff. I haven't had a chance to work on my sleeper builds yet. They're on the back burner for a while. Some complications and delays, but I keep thinking about what I want to do and looking up other people's sleeper builds with those. Not too many Dell sleeper builds, at least not with an empty. Some people have done it with the small form factor, which is crazy. One person even put in a custom water loop, which I think is insane for that small of a case.
Wow, yeah, that small form factor case that they use on the Optiplexes, I'm surprised you could fit any kind of water cooling in there.
Yeah. And I don't want to make it like a sleeper. I don't want to make it showy on the outside. I want to make it crappy on the outside and then have good parts. Like the best build I can think of is, of course, Ryzen, because their stock cooling, the stock cooler, CPU cooler, is better than the Intel stock cooler. And
good point.
Want to try and do some other stuff with it. I would like to put a water cooling kit in it, but I'm not sure if it'll fit. I'm not sure if a 240 will fit. That's what I would like to do. That way it'd be quiet on the inside, especially with the Vardar fans, if I use EK kit.
Ooh, those Vardars are some good silent fans.
Mm-hmm. Great static pressure fans too, man.
Yeah. So
now does that case have 120 mounts in it?
For the Dell Optiplex?
Yeah. Or would you have to kind of fab
there's space, and like the cool thing about that versus the HP case that I have is the front cover. You can take that off, and there's like the ventilation part in the front cover, which is nice for airflow. But there's a wall for nothing there, and then the hard drive cage is like the wall is here of metal, and I'd have to cut space for a fan right there, and then hopefully cut enough for a fan here, because I want to make a 240, because I want to do GPU and CPU if I can. If not, then I'll pick which one I want to do. And then there's the hard drive cage, which is right here, which is kind of in front, which is nice. Some premium cases have that too, but I might have to tear that out to compensate for especially for the pump res, to go right there with a cage for the hard drive cage. And then I'm going to have the ASRock motherboard that has the two M.2 slots on the board, so that'll cover the hard drives.
Nice.
Storage. Nice. Yeah, one is NVMe and one is SATA. So I'm especially waiting for parts to come down, because the Western Digital Black NVMe drives, the 500 gig that I want to get is 200, and it's like, it's not low enough for me right now.
Yeah, it's Yeah, right on the cusp there. If it was just a little bit lower price per gigabyte,
Yeah.
it'd be perfect.
Yeah.
Seems like anything with now. I don't know if it's because of the type of memory that they're coupling with them, but it seems like anything with a PCIe controller is pretty pricey and more on the performance end.
It is
Which-
because of the part.
Yeah.
Well, it doesn't help matters that Apple is basically buying up all the NAND flash that exists anywhere.
Oh, are they?
Yep.
That for their notebooks?
For their notebooks and for their iPhones, because
that's
Yeah.
right.
basically Apple's been the reason RAM and memory prices have been so high,
Yeah.
or storage prices have been so high, is because Apple is basically eating the market to keep up production of their iDevices.
Mm-hmm.
And Samsung with Galaxy, or so that's what they say, right?
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, we're going to talk more about that in a little bit. But all right, Jason, what have you been up to?
I've been keeping my head low, man. Now I have gotten a little crazy on the Steam. Well, there's a Steam summer sale, right? So I got a couple of titles there. I probably spent around 150. I got a bunch of games, and if I'm not working, I'm just kind of playing games. Now I've been kind of researching, overclocking the 2700X, and I keep coming back to the same conclusion when it comes to that thing, and that's don't need to overclock it. So,
Yeah,
because
XFR does a lot of the work.
Yeah, it does. And with this open air case and the 360 rad, like, got it set on PWM mode and spins up when it needs to cool and stays ultra quiet when it doesn't need. I mean, I'm sitting right around 4 to 4.1 gigahertz most of the time. So I don't have the best motherboard in the world, but it's not bad. I'm kind of digging it. Now I have been researching like VRM cooling, because the SoC section of the VRM does seem to get hot. Now, when I say hot, I don't exactly know how hot. I'm not really looking at hardware monitor or anything like that. I'm just kind of putting my hand on the heatsink itself. And it's definitely hotter than the V-Core VRM. So I've been kind of researching options there. There's not a whole lot. One thing I'm kind of looking at maybe is the Mars fan, but those things are pricey.
Right.
Things are they look good, but they're extremely pricey. And I don't want a ghetto solution because I've got like an open air case and it looks nice. I did my cable management work. I got my RGB. I want it to look pretty. So
that's the problem with having a nice case, right? Is you want it to keep it looking nice. At least with a ghetto case, you don't care if it looks ghetto.
Right. That's half the reason I got the 360 rad. I know it's overkill, but it fills out that right section of the case really nice. And then the RGB Fantex the Halos rings on there. So yeah, I want it to look pretty. It's artwork.
Yep.
So I don't know. How about you? What you been up to, Mr. Ned?
Well, I got bit by the Steam summer sale too. Admittedly, I mostly bought older titles. I went back and bought Baldur's Gate 2 Enhanced Edition, Icewind Dale Enhanced Edition.
Nice.
Just Cause 3 XL Edition.
Oh, okay. Nice.
They're
all solid titles, though.
Yeah, just going back and filling out the back catalog and whatnot. Not that I'll ever actually getting around to play them, but
that's the thing, right? People go nuts on the Steam Summer Sale because you get really good deals, and then you either don't play them for a couple years or you just forget about them. Oh, I got that game when you're looking through your library later. Yeah.
Just in case you ever think about playing a game.
Right.
It's there.
It's kind of like that meme that I've seen passed around that Extra Credit did of the distracted boyfriend meme, where it has like it has a game walking by it has a girl walking by, and it has games you've played and beaten 5 times walking away, and he's glancing back at her, and then it's
Yes.
just bought in the Steam Summer Sale.
Yeah. Yeah.
The spurned girlfriend.
Yep.
That's so true. That is so true.
But on the hardware front, I've been doing a little bit of Craigslist diving lately on the hardware front. I picked up an H170 Gaming 3 gigabyte motherboard for about $45.
Nice.
And I found another Craigslist listing of someone who's selling a Core i3 6100 that would fit that motherboard with a pair of fans and a case for about $60.
Not bad.
Considering the chip by itself goes for about $75 on eBay, figure I might as well pick that up. Of course, the only problem with building up anything, any of the H100 or newer chipsets is DDR4 prices, right?
Yeah.
So I'm trying to see if I can find a deal either on eBay or on Craigslist or on a decent kit of DDR4.
So speaking of that, I have seen a deal on my city's Facebook marketplace that actually seems like a good deal. It's 32 gigs of G.Skill Flare RAM, 3000 megahertz. Normally would pay like 400 something. The person selling it for, it's 4 sticks. The person selling it for 180. It's like,
that's an excellent deal.
Yeah.
It's like a 50% discount.
Yeah.
More actually.
I could take that, and if I had the money for that, I could take that and then build 2 systems with it, or one powerhouse system if I wanted to.
Nice.
I was thinking I could build. Actually, if I did buy that, I could build the 2 sleeper builds with the 16 gig each.
There you go.
Heck
yeah, 16 is like the sweet spot, I think.
That would be perfect for the Ryzen, of course, because it needs at least 3,000 megahertz for Infinity Fabric.
Right, right. Cool stuff. So it sounds like we all got some neat projects going on.
Yep.
So let's hop into the news. And the first bit of news we have on the list here is actually something that popped up just after the show last week. And it's about Intel, specifically about Intel CEO Brian Krzanich, who initially it was reported that he resigned, but there is now rumor that he was in fact forced out by Intel's board due to violating the corporate fraternization policy.
Oh, that's funny. Sex scandal at the top.
Yep.
So yeah, basically, Intel CEO Brian Krzanich violated company policy about having a relationship with a subordinate coworker who reports to him or anyone under him, even though it was a consensual relationship, apparently. And on one hand, I applaud Intel for the fact that they are willing to apply such a corporate policy to anyone, regardless of level, because I think we all know that there are a lot of corporations out there who, when it comes to the C-suite executives, are a little more lenient with them than the rank and file.
Right.
So good on Intel for that, but at the same time, this is definitely something Intel did not need right now.
And he's, I mean, by all accounts, I know there's probably some controversy, but they've done all right financially, right? I mean, they're. I thought I saw something somewhere where they had made some sort of record profits or something like that because they'd focused more on the data center or something over the year.
Right. They had been making the move to focus more on where most of their profit derives from, and that's in the enterprise space. Uh, but then it was right around. It was Krasanich basically has had to weather several problems with Intel. First, there was the Spectre and Meltdown bugs
Oh yeah.
that he had to kind of help guide the company through, and he did all right at that, as far as we can tell. Then there was, the scandal at Computex with the
The 5
5
gigahertz
gigahertz 28 core,
Yep.
powered by an air conditioner and like 5 refrigerators.
pretty
Mhm.
much.
That's big old massive 1,000-watt cooler. Yeah.
And so, I mean, the fact that he's kept the company profitable, even in the face of losing market share, both in the consumer and enterprise spaces, but Intel has continued to make record profits, that's not insignificant.
True. So it kind of makes you wonder if maybe there was. I mean, yeah, on paper they're saying it's the whatchamacallit. It's the fraternization thing.
The
But
non-fraternation.
I wonder if something else is going on. Because normally, yeah. Go ahead.
Thinking it might be some kind of internal coup.
Hmm.
You never know. Big enterprise like that, you never know. People. I mean, everything's political. Everything's got power bases, and you know, you don't have to work too long in the corporate world to understand that there's politics involved. I don't know. It's kind of intriguing, though. So I wonder who they're going to get to. So they've got an interim guy, right?
Yes, currently Robert Swan, who was the CFO, has been appointed as interim chief executive.
Did you say Swan?
Yeah,
Yes.
his last name is Swan.
SWA.
Are you serious?
Swan.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, good luck to him. I was thinking pizza. I was thinking the Swan man.
Hmm.
Ah, okay. No, I thought you were about to make a swan song joke.
I was thinking like the Swan has landed in the CEO.
I was thinking about making some other references, but I got to keep it kind of family friendly.
Well, before we go any further in that direction, let's jump to the next topic. So, this one's from Think Computers. AMD motherboard manufacturers remove support for older CPU models.
Oh yeah, the Brisbanes, right? I
Oh, yeah.
saw that.
Yeah. So apparently, because the AMD AM4 motherboards have support for so many processors, for some of the BIOSes literally aren't large enough, or are too large to fit in the 16 megabit memory that's kept for the BIOS on the motherboard. And so they're having to eliminate certain CPU models in order to make the BIOS fit.
Mm. Is
Well,
that going to be like AM2 and AM3? I don't think they can get rid of AM3 yet.
Well, the thing is, you have to remember AM4. It's mostly for AM4 socket motherboards they're doing this. The problem came when they included the Bristol Ridge APUs that were based on the old excavator architecture
Yeah.
in the first round of AM4 motherboards.
Right.
And so,
which
because
mostly, I believe were used by system builders and OEMs,
Yeah.
and I didn't mean to interrupt.
That's fine. They were mostly intended to basically act as a stopgap until the Ryzen 3 and Ryzen 5 G processors came out.
Yeah. Yeah. That's right, because those are the first APUs.
And so, most of these motherboard manufacturers are dropping support for the Bristol Ridge APUs in favor of including support for the latest generation, which kind of hurts the whole upgrade proposition for AMD motherboards, but if we're being honest, not really.
Yeah.
Well, when I read that and when you mentioned it, first thing I thought was, it works for now, right? But what happens when Ryzen 2 comes out? Because they're going to have the same. I assume they're going to have the same problem. So it's going to be interesting to see what kind of solution they offer for that, because a lot of people are still going to be running the Ryzen 1 chips in those, or there's probably still going to be people buying those in some fashion.
Yeah, probably because they're cheaper than Ryzen 2. Well, I don't know if they're cheaper. It's Ryzen 2600 and 1600 are around the same price.
Right. Well, so we've got Ryzen Plus out now, right? Well, the next tick or talk or whatever is going to be Ryzen 2. That'll be on a smaller manufacturing process and probably slightly different or more optimized architecture. So when that happens, they'll have basically three lines that they're supporting. So they'll have that new. So they'll have Ryzen 2 or Ryzen 3000, and then they'll have two lines that are legacy. So it'll be interesting to see what they do at that point, unless they've switched over to DDR5, which I think the timing on that will be probably later, but not exactly sure. That would be interesting.
Yeah. Basically, what it comes down to is the reason they're doing this is the other solution would be to upgrade to a 256 megabit flash chip versus the 128 that they're currently putting on there, which doesn't sound like a huge difference, but it would increase the cost of motherboards by $3 to $4 per unit. And when you have millions of motherboards, it
adds up.
Cost.
Right. That does add up. It does add up.
And so that's why they're taking this approach for now. I figure that whenever the successor for the current Ryzen 2000 series comes out, when we start seeing the X570 and B550 motherboards, we'll probably see them moving to the 256 megabit chip, just because. But at that point, do we really think that people are going to be putting first-gen Ryzen CPUs on a 500 series motherboard?
I doubt it. I really doubt it.
Can't really think of a use case for that.
I mean, I know there's certain people out there who are putting first-gen Ryzen on 400 series motherboards, and I can understand why they do that, because you can get the Ryzen 7 1700 dirt cheap right now.
Yeah.
Yep. And honestly, I mean, X470 motherboards you can get for a pretty decent price. I mean, yeah, you can get B450 or B350 for half the cost, but $120, $140 is kind of entry level for X470. That's not bad, especially when you're thinking like 6-8 core. I mean, I can understand why people would do that. There might be some features that they want. They might just want a newer motherboard that's potentially supported longer from a BIOS perspective. Like, yeah, I can understand that. But yeah, 550, X570 on a first gen, yeah, I don't see that happening.
The only use case I can see is tech YouTubers who want to see if there's any drawbacks of doing that, but not like regular people.
Yeah, I think really it's kind of like the whole debate with Intel's Z370 chipset, where basically the only real difference between the 170, 270, and 370 is because Intel said so.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, I mean, there's very little difference between X370 and X470. I mean, it's Very minor.
Yeah, it's basically better memory support and support for XFR2.
Yeah. Yep.
That's
Slightly.
what it boils down to.
Yeah, and I don't know. Did 370 have USB-C?
It had USB. It had USB 3 Gen 1, and I think X470 adds Gen 2 10 gigabits per second.
And they supposedly had, and they also mentioned that idle power is a little bit less
Right.
on the 470, and then Store MI you get for free, but you can get it for $20 on B350 or X4 or 370.
Right.
And X39 or Z399 or whatever that is. Which actually, that's kind of a cool program.
Yeah, I've heard interesting things about Store MI. I just haven't had the opportunity to. I don't have a system appropriate, or I don't have a storage subsystem appropriate to test it out with. Mostly because I keep buying old hardware and building them up and then flipping them.
Nice.
Do you have much success with flipping computers?
It depends. If you try to flip them, like sell it as a gaming computer on Craigslist or eBay, you're going to get burned hard.
Mm.
I find a lot more success building entry-level PCs and then flipping them as family or office computers.
Okay.
Or like taking old corporate laptops or old corporate desktops and refurbishing them, and then flipping those as entry-level family PCs.
Okay.
Have you had many issues with supporting them?
Not really a whole lot. The nice thing about taking the old corporate desktops and laptops like that is there's lots of documentation online available for free. And there's also lots of support for them available for free.
That's good.
And I assume, if they're retaining the storage, all they've done basically is just wipe the drive or reset the OS, get rid of the data. And I assume in some cases it's up to date, with an operating system and drivers and all that stuff. So,
well, even then, a lot of times I'll buy a system that doesn't have a drive and has no RAM, but it has the CPU, the motherboard, and the power supply. And then you can buy lots of RAM, like not just, sorry, I said that poorly. You can buy RAM in lots for pretty cheap per unit.
it's like you're going to Aldi's to buy RAM.
And then hard drives. Most people won't buy used hard drives, but I've had pretty good luck buying lots of decommissioned hard drives. I'll give you an example. The place where I'm working was going to throw out a whole bunch of laptops about 6 months ago. They were just going to be sent to an e-cycler. So I said, well, do you mind if I go through the pile and see which ones work? They said, sure, we don't care. So I went through and I found about 14 of those laptops that still functioned.
Wow.
Nice.
And so I took those 14 laptops. I ordered a lot of 20 DDR3 1600 laptop SODIMMs and 10, I think there were 320 gigabyte, 7200 RPM hard drives. Of the ones I received, all the RAM sticks worked. No problem there. And of the hard drives, I said 10, I meant 12. There was 12 of them and 10 of them worked. There was only 2 of them I got smart errors on, and they were the oldest and slowest drives of the bunch, so it didn't really matter. So yeah, I was able to build those up and sell. They were HP EliteBook 8460Ps, which
those are. Sound like an office configuration. So
yeah, they're basically corporate laptops, 14 inches with 1280 by 800 or 1366 by 768 screens.
Yeah.
Core i5 dual cores that are hyper-threaded. Like, I think the one I kept for myself has a 2450M.
Okay, so Sandy Bridge.
Yeah, so Sandy Bridge. I loaded them up with 8 gigs of RAM apiece, and a 320 gig hard drive, and I was able to sell those for $150 a pop.
Which for $150, that's not a bad deal. I mean, that's still a pretty solid productivity platform. You know what I mean? Like if all you're doing is if your tasks are non-gaming related, bookkeeping, internet browsing, Netflix, whatever, I mean, that just general computing, that's more than enough. Just close the lid, hook it up to a monitor, man, or TV.
Pretty much. And that was exactly my thinking. The type of person I sold those to is exactly the type of person who 90% of what they do is Facebook, Netflix, YouTube.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, you've got more than enough RAM, more than enough storage. And with the nice thing about those corporate or office builds for those notebooks is they're going to be of better build quality and material than your cheapy $300 or $400 laptop that you get out of a brick and mortar. So,
right,
or typically, so yeah, that's a heck of a deal there, actually.
Yeah, I kept one of them. Well, I wound up keeping 4 of them, but that was because 3 of them had issues. One of them, it works perfectly fine. Everything's fine about it except it has no sound because the sound chip is burned out. Everything else about it works fine, just no sound.
Well, you got USB ports, right? You know what I mean? Like, you can get a USB peripheral that's pretty inexpensive, I think.
Right, but since I kept that one for myself, I don't worry too much about it.
Right on.
And there was 2 others that were identical, but one of them had a shattered screen, and the other one had about a third of the keys on the keyboard didn't work. So I figure between the 2 of them, I can take the 2 of them apart and put them back together as a single functioning laptop, and then keep the spare parts for later.
Good idea.
And the last one was one of them that was different from the others. It was a 12-inch laptop, the 2560p, or excuse me, 2570p. It has an Ivy Bridge processor, which is pretty nice. They were a decent. It's only about 7% faster than Sandy Bridge, but hey, 7% is 7%. And I loaded it up with a 240 gig SSD and 8 gigs of RAM, and it's now my TV buddy. It's the computer I sit and dink around on while I'm watching TV.
Nice. Well, so I'm using an i7 with 16 gigs of RAM in my dev build, and it's an Ivy Bridge i7. It's perfectly fine. So.
Yep. Anyway, I think we rabbit trailed a bit, but that's okay.
Yeah.
Let's see. Oh yes, this one's a fun one. NVIDIA unveils and gives away their new limited edition 32 gigabyte Titan V CEO edition.
What is up with that? Now, is that a data center card, or
So the Titan
32 gigs.
So the Titan V is based on the Volta architecture, and Volta the Volta V100 was originally designed for the data center.
Mm-hmm.
But NVIDIA released a limited run of them for consumers as the Titan V, a $3,000 GPU with 5,120 CUDA cores, 640 tensor cores.
Oh my gosh.
96 ROPS, clocked at 1,200 megahertz.
That's an insane amount of compute power right there.
Oh yeah.
How many teraflops of performance are they looking at? Like 15?
So the Titan V in its original configuration, which had 12 gigabits of HBM2 memory, or 12 gigabytes, excuse me, of HBM2 memory, had 13.8 teraflops of single precision and 6.9 teraflops of double precision processing power.
Wow.
But its tensor performance, which is the performance for deep learning tasks, was 110 teraflops. But that's just that's the plain old pleb Titan V at $3,000. The CEO edition, it increases the number of ROPs to 128. It increases the memory bandwidth bus from 3072 to 4096 bits. Increases the memory bandwidth to 900 gigabytes per second. Increases the VRAM to 32 gigabytes. And increases the tensor performance to 125 teraflops.
See what you do. You build a cluster of those and install Skynet. That's what you do.
I thought you were going to say mine.
No. Hello, Skynet. Nice knowing you.
Just make sure that you include as a variable in your Skynet algorithm, turn against humanity equals false.
Yes, definitely.
So what is that? What is that beautiful piece of silicone come wrapped in? I wonder. So when you mentioned CEO or corporate edition, that reminds me of some like cheesy WWE type thing where they're all dressed up in suits and stuff. We're the corporate guys, or corporate edition. I don't know. I don't know why I'm
screen here real quick. So that's what it looks like in its packaging right there.
Wow.
So that's Jensen Huang with his copy of the CEO edition, so named because the first one was given to him.
Of course.
And if we scroll down
for that card,
there has been no price announced. It is not going to be a retail SKU as of yet. However, they are considering it for the future. And you can see they've got a diagram here of what the die looks like.
That's crazy. So there's monolithic and then there's that.
Yeah. And so,
wow.
And this is from Anantech.
So how many versions of the Titan do they have now?
Well, let's see.
4 or 5? I'm guessing 5 now.
Well, it depends on which generation of the Titan you're talking about.
Oh my gosh.
There was the original Titan, which was back on the Kepler architecture.
Mm-hmm. That was the first one. Yep.
And then there was the second Titan on Maxwell. Then there was the Titan X Maxwell, the Titan X Pascal, then the Titan X little p Pascal.
The little p.
Well, no, that's literally how they marketed it. There was the Titan, the Titan X, and then the Titan X little p.
That's fine.
And then the Titan X Pascal.
Yes. And then there was the Titan V.
Yep.
And now there is the Titan V CEO edition, which apparently is not going to be a retail product, at least for now. But it's called the CEO edition because they gave the first one to their CEO, Jensen Huang.
Wow.
So wait, what about this says the Tesla V100 PCIe.
So yeah, the Tesla V100 is the enterprise version of that card.
Right. Which is a whopping $10,000.
Pretty much. So basically, what the Titan V CEO edition is a Tesla V100 card that has had double the memory to be sold as a not quite retail product.
Yeah.
That's crazy. So I wonder. I mean, usually if you're a gamer and you're getting a Titan, normally I want to say the rule of thumb is you're just you're getting it for bragging rights. Otherwise, you get the TI if you want the Titan level of performance, and in some cases you actually get slightly better gaming performance with the TI. But wonder who buys that card.
Well, the Titan V, given the way the Volta architecture is designed, is less about gaming performance and a lot more about workstation class workflows. It's largely designed for people who do heavy deep learning tasks or who have to do high-end computing like scientific tasks or what's the other major usage? I think it's used in some very high-end modeling software.
Mm.
And speaking of crazy, how about Samsung fitting 8 terabytes of NAND on a single SSD thanks to its 3D memory tech?
I saw that. That's insane. What were you going to say?
No, I was going to say the same thing. I think I saw that somewhere. Can't remember the context of the article, but that's good. I mean, I'm glad that they're able to push the envelope. Now, what form factor is that on? Is that on 2280 or?
Well, it is an NVMe solid-state drive, but it is on their self-made NF form factor, which stands for new form factor. So it is the new form factor.
That's hilarious.
But it allows them to fit 8 terabytes worth of NAND chips on an ultra small footprint of just 11 centimeters by 3.05 centimeters.
So that sounds like it's about. That sounds like it's taking like basically two M.2s and kind of putting them side by side almost. No?
Just about it.
Just about.
So 2280 millimeter is roughly equivalent to 8 centimeters long.
Okay.
So at 11 centimeters, it's slightly longer than the traditional 2280 form factor for NVMe SSDs. And it's slightly wider at 3 centimeters.
Wow.
But it's largely designed for the enterprise server space, where density, of course, is king.
Yeah.
In the consumer space, we usually don't worry about how much space a particular component takes up. But in this, in the enterprise space, where it's all about fitting as many racks as you can on a rack.
You said rack. No, I get you. So in the data center, you typically have your fast tier, and then your whatever's not fast is your, what do they call it, metal, or your slow tier, which is typically your huge amount of storage capacity. And then they've got tiering solutions that, depending on the workload, if it's virtualization or if it's whatever the cloud use case is, sometimes they've got really complex data software to kind of map out where your applications or virtual systems are kind of stored out. Sometimes they map it over a combination of that fast tier and then the slow tier, and then combine them, kind of like what you see with Optane versus Optane with a hard drive, or StoreMI. StoreMI is a really good example of that on a simplified basis. That's interesting. 8 terabytes, man.
And they're claiming read speeds of 3,100 megabytes per second and write speeds of up to 2,000 megabytes per second. which of course is about 3 to 5 times the speed of a typical SATA SSD.
Yeah.
Well, so SATA's, what is it? SATA 3, you usually top out at around 550, right? Megabytes per second.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So, gosh, what is that like? That's about 6 times as fast. So,
Isn't that like a little bit faster than the consumer NVMe?
Yeah, consumer NVMe with like the Samsung 970, which would be a step down from this. The Samsung 970 Pro gets about 2,700 megabytes per second reads.
that's crazy.
And about 1,300 megabytes per second writes. So it's a significant step down performance-wise, but again, you have to remember these are enterprise-grade controllers.
Yeah.
Versus the more consumer-grade ones you'd see on your 900 series.
I wonder if this is going to trickle down to, because of the new form factor, if this is going to trickle down to the consumer market, if they're going to make a consumer version.
I mean, they did with the previous gen one. You know, they did release the PM851, which was essentially the consumer version of their enterprise-grade SSD.
Mm.
So I would not be surprised to see this eventually make its way to the consumer space.
It's still amazing how fast a typical SSD is. A typical SATA SSD.
Yeah.
I mean, especially when you're transferring large multi-terabyte files around. Like, it transfers, when you're transferring from, say, one SSD to another, it's done in seconds. It's crazy. I can't even, it's getting to a point where it's hard to even imagine how fast some of these drives are.
Yeah, I mean, I still get amazed with my SATA SSD when I'm pulling reads and writes from it at 300 to 400 megabytes per second.
Exactly.
And to think that if I jump to a PCIe NVMe solution, even a consumer grade solution, where I'd be able to pull 4 times that.
Right.
It's kind of like, okay, yeah, that'd be great, but do I even have a use case for that?
Yeah, I keep thinking about getting one of the NVMe, but I don't really need it. I mean, the only thing I can think of is it would be useless for a boot drive because, I mean, my SATA SSD already boots OS in 10 seconds. So what is it going to do, 1 second boot time? Or milliseconds?
Or you spend all that money and you shave a second off.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, the one use case I've heard, and the one that I'd actually consider, especially if I'm planning to want to learn to video edit. And so if I'm going to be doing heavy video editing, using something like that for a scratch disk would be lovely.
That is definitely the use case for NVMe. I've heard it from like top level. I saw a video from a top level video editor, and that's what he said he uses. Also, Tech Deals uses the 960 Pro and other YouTubers who do their own video editing.
Yeah. And to think the 960 Pro is now a generation old.
That's insane.
It's still fast.
I know.
It's still fast. It's still crazy fast. Yeah, I could see that. I mean, having like a decent M.2 NVMe and then backing that up with like just a couple of SATA SSDs, you know, and then maybe some, if you need it for archival, you know, you could get actually they're not too terribly expensive. You could get those hot swappable you know, hard drive external enclosures. I forget what they call them, but they connect through either the 5 or 10 gigabit per second USB
Like disk
connection.
bays or something.
Right. Right. And in some cases, they're even hot
Dolby?
swappable.
I think Dolby might be one. Not Dolby, but it's something like that. Can't think of the name of it. Dabby or something. I've seen it online.
Drobo.
Drobo, that's it. Drobo.
Yeah,
It's like a 4-disc. It's a 4 bay, really high end enclosure like that.
yeah, for a network attached storage. I've considered rolling my own network attached storage, but every time I think about doing it, I go and I price out the hard drives for it. And I mean, I'm not pricing out high-end hard drives either. I'm talking about like maybe an 8 terabyte NAS, 4 bays, or 4 2 terabyte drives.
Mm-hmm.
And then I get sick looking at the prices, and I'm just
Yes.
like, nope.
It's like 400, 500 and above. I'm like, no, thank you.
Yeah. Well, whenever you start looking at some big data solutions like that, even if it's for home use or whatever, it can get pricey really quick.
Mm-hmm.
That's a good use case for a Ryzen 8 core, though, or even a 6 core.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Let's see. What other things do we have on the table? I guess we need to go through some of these a little bit more rapid fire. EK Waterblocks expands their complete custom loop kits with RGB models.
Sounds pretty cool.
Yeah, so EK released last year their A240 and A360 kits, which are basically all-in-one water cooling kits. But rather than being an all-in-one water cooler, like you'd buy from the likes of Corsair or Intermax or Cooler Master or what have you, these were instead basically do-it-yourself kits to build a CPU water block that included tubing, a reservoir, a pump, a radiator, and a CPU block.
Yeah, like an open loop kit. Yep.
And so now they are upgrading those kits to include RGB fans, RGB versions of their Vardar fans,
Mm-hmm.
as well as the Supremacy Evo RGB version of the CPU block, and the RGB version of their pump reservoir combo, the XRes 140 Revo.
Nice. It was about time, right? I mean, it was just going to be a matter of time. I mean, when you started seeing the RGB on the closed loop coolers, like the Kraken, and now you've got a nice Thermaltake kit.
Yeah.
It's just a matter of time. That's pretty sweet, though. What's the price point on it? Is that a 240 rad, or is that a...
The site I'm looking at this on is a European site, so they're pricing the 240 RGB kit is going for €399, which means it'll probably go for about $450 US.
Oof.
Which for a 200, if you've ever priced out a pump, a reservoir, a radiator, and a CPU block from EK, you'd spend that or more.
Well, I guess that's not bad. I mean, they're using off-the-shelf parts that you could part out individually, so it's not too bad. Kind of surprised, though, that I think Hunter, you mentioned that was that kit you were talking about earlier? Did it come with the GPU block?
Yeah, it doesn't come with the... I was disappointed because it doesn't come with the GPU. At least from the picture and the article picture of the box, it doesn't come with a GPU water block. But if you know the metal that they use in it, if you know like the stuff that goes into it, you can search their EK website for a water block to use with it, a compatible one. So that's what I was thinking about doing if I went to this kind of thing, which is a step up from their A240G, because it's RGB. It's basically the same setup. It has the same 240 rad and looks like the same water block for CPU and the same pump res. It just strangely doesn't have a GPU water block included. But it could be to keep, if they want to keep the price down, they wouldn't include it. Or if their A240G sales weren't up enough, I would definitely see that they wouldn't include it, or some other reason.
Well, maybe that's because there's differences in PCBs out there.
Yeah. It used to be that you could get universal GPU blocks, but typically those would only cover the chip itself. And these days, you have to have such good VRM cooling as well as cooling for the memory chips themselves that you almost have to have a custom block for every single GPU out there. I mean, I know when I was looking for water blocks for my RX 480s, you had to specify which manufacturer your RX 480s were, and if they were using a reference PCB or not.
Right. Yep.
Thankfully, mine were. The ones I'm using are SwiftTech blocks. But, you know, if I was going to do an upgrade on my system, right now I'm running the RX 480s and a SwiftTech H220 with CPU. I would definitely be taking a look at EK, because EK makes some of the best stuff in the industry right now.
Oh yeah.
Well, who's their main competitor? AlphaCool?
AlphaCool, Primo Chill, and SwiftTech, probably in that order.
Well, I mean, it makes sense when you think about how much wattage video cards pumping out. You know, anything from a 1070 on up. You know, they list the TDP at 150 watts or something small for video card, but then, you know, when you start overclocking them, putting them under different kinds of workloads, it's not uncommon to see that wattage jump up to like 250, 300 watts. So that's a lot of heat.
Indeed. It very much is.
I mean, you almost need a 240 just on something pushing 300 watts, I would think.
Just about it. I would tend to agree. Yeah, I honestly wouldn't run a system using both GPU and CPU with anything less than two 240s. All right. Well, this one could be a topic in and of itself for a long discussion, but overclock3d.net did some work with the Ryzen 7 2700X, experimenting with undervolting and then overclocking the processor. The reason is because they'd had some success with AMD GPUs in the past, undervolting them first and then being able to overclock them higher than they could from the factory.
Vega 56.
Right, with Vega 56 being the prime example. They wanted to see if the same thing held true for Ryzen CPUs. They found some very interesting results. In particular, they were able to get up to, after the undervolt, they were still able to get up to 4 gigahertz at 1.2 volts. And they never got above 57 degrees Celsius.
Wow.
Which there's a 10-degree offset that's already built in. So I don't know if they took that into consideration when they were listing temps, but even 57 degrees, that's an 8-core at 4 gigahertz.
They say they took that into account. And that was being cooled by a Corsair H60 CPU cooler, which is a 120 millimeter. That's a 120 millimeter closed loop liquid cooler.
That's crazy.
So that's going to be comparable to probably a $60 air cooler, I want to say.
More or less.
That's pretty good.
And for comparison, at the stock voltages and stock clocks, with the same cooler, they were hitting 63 degrees Celsius. Whereas when they tried to overclock it using the standard method, which is more volts and higher frequency, they were able to get up to 4.2 gigahertz at 1.4 volts. But at that point, with the H60, they were pushing 78 degrees Celsius. Which the TJ Max for Ryzen chips is roughly 80 degrees Celsius. So
Yeah.
Well, AMD did a great job with Zen Plus.
So it seems. It seems they were even able to, at 1.225 volts, they were able to set a 5 gigahertz boost clock for single core tasks that only hit 59 degrees Celsius. So neat stuff. I'm going to have to dig into that article more to see if I can maybe get a little bit more performance out of my 1800X. See if some of the same techniques could be applied to push it a little higher. Because right now, I have been able to overclock it to about 3.95 gigahertz. I haven't been able to break 4 with this particular chip. But right now, I've got it running at stock just because it does everything I need at stock right now.
Yeah, that's a good processor. Still 395. That's impressive. A lot of people hit a wall around 3839. So
yeah.
Yep.
Of course, I didn't test 395 for long-term stability, with like Prime 95 or something. Mostly I overclocked it I overclocked it slowly to like 3.8, 3.9. I tried 4.0 and it failed Cinebench, so I backed off to 3.95 and it passed Cinebench, and I'm like, you know what, that's good enough. That's enough playing around with it for now. I'm just going to put it back to stock and wait to see if, there's further improvements from BIOS and whatnot. That was right after I got it.
Nice. Yeah, I thought, I thought so hard about, because Micro Center had that great deal on the 1700. Oh my gosh, I almost bought that sucker. That thing looks so good. Well, $199, and then $30 off of motherboard. You pair that with a decent B350 with good VRM, and pretty much most of the G-Skill kits out there worked pretty well with them. So,
we went with the Flare X's.
Yep. Oh man, I almost pulled the trigger. Almost did. But I kept reading stuff on Zen Plus, and I'd have picked up the 2600X if they had it in stock, but they were sold out of those things almost immediately. So got the 2700X instead.
All right.
That's pretty solid.
Got another little topic here from Gamers Nexus. So there was a German website, heist.de, that leaked a copy of NVIDIA's NDA for their next generation processors. It got leaked onto Reddit, and oddly enough, the NDA does not cover the NDA itself. So it was perfectly legitimate for everyone to talk about it. And so Gamers Nexus decided to have an actual lawyer take a look at the NDA and see if some of the hyperbolic statements made online actually matched with what the NDA said in its legalese. They have a lovely video for you just to sit and listen to if you want to. But basically, the lawyer goes through it line by line and answers a lot of the questions. The conclusion they reached was, we think this was a mountain made out of a molehill, and that a little language in the document is abnormal or dangerous. But other than that, parties may terminate at any time, despite what some commenters may tell you, and that such an NDA doesn't somehow magically prevent GPP2, from getting out, because remember, that wouldn't be covered under confidential information.
So it's probably like every other NDA out there from
Pretty
a
much.
major manufacturer. I bet you people are still mad about. This sounds to me like it's GPP fallout. Like they've got such a stained reputation for GPP, which rightfully so, they earned it.
Yep.
Yeah. GPP was one of those things where when the information got out and they knew they'd stepped in it, instead of backing off, apologizing, and doing what they could to repair their brand, they instead decided to hold firm and deny.
I plead the fifth. I'm on the stand. I'm not going to say a word. I'm going to plead the fifth the whole time.
And given NVIDIA's behavior in other areas, it's little wonder.
Careful. Sorry.
It's little wonder that a lot of people don't have the trust for NVIDIA they used to. And I say this as someone who used to buy NVIDIA almost exclusively. When I first started gaming, I would always go for an NVIDIA product first, until I bought my first Radeon, which was a Radeon 9700 Pro way back in 2006.
Nice. Well, Intel's done similar redonkulous stuff too. I mean, what was that whole issue that AMD sued them over? Bad marketing or bad... Gosh, what was that? So Intel had done something similar where they were offering heavy rebates to OEMs and companies that purchase their product to have only Intel exclusive or Intel specific product stacks rather than AMD. And AMD sued them, and the court found in favor of AMD, and AMD got a lot of money. And it helped keep AMD afloat for a while.
Yeah, basically, my understanding what happened there is Intel was using their dollars that were earmarked for marketing to basically buy off the major manufacturers like HP, Dell, and the like, to ensure that a certain percentage of PCs produced, a massive majority, were featured Intel processors, and that if they used AMD processors, then they would lose those benefits, and specifically that money. And when it was revealed, then Intel was taken to court and they lost massively.
Well, I still think Intel's kind of been on the winninger side. If that makes sense. So if you look at notebook specs of similarly configured systems, you normally, and this has been the case for years, but you typically see better components in the Intel configured notebook versus the AMD configured notebook. Like better build quality, better quality RAM, bigger battery kind of thing. So I think that has helped Intel pretty significantly, more than they probably paid AMD, of course.
Oh, of course.
Ryzen's helping out quite a bit.
Yeah, I think we've seen kind of Intel in their response to Ryzen have been kind of scrambling. They weren't expecting it to be as good as it was.
Which is good. It's good for us. It's good
for
the consumer.
Competition is always good for the consumer. Speaking of lack of competition, though, DRAM manufacturers could face billions in fines in antitrust cases in China. So, DRAM manufacturers, there are only 3 major DRAM manufacturers in the world: Samsung, Micron, and SK Hynix. And so Chinese regulators are investigating the fact that these three, who control 90% of the DRAM market, may have colluded together to keep RAM and memory prices unusually high.
Mm.
You know, when I read that, I literally jumped up and down in joy when I read that article. You knew something was fishy because in 2016, you could spend $100 and get a good quality 16 gig kit.
Like I did.
Yeah. And it seemed like almost overnight they jumped up to $200.
Yeah.
And they kept spouting like, well, it's because we've got all kinds of major RAM shortages, which they probably did for a little bit, but the prices stayed, and then they increased a little bit, and they kept blaming it on, data centers or
Smartphone manufacturers.
Smartphones, tablets. Yeah, they blamed Samsung, the Galaxies. They blamed the iPhones. Well, it's because the iPhone released. Brr, brr, brr. But then you've got, memory retailers making comments to guys like Gamers Nexus saying, well, we're making money hand over fist now. And their stock prices are just going through the roof. I think it sounds to me like what happened is they were in a shortage for a while. So they used that as an excuse and they just wrote it out. And then maybe they did collude. I'm sure they did. And so they just kept the prices the same.
Well, and if they did experience a shortage, then all they'd really have to do to keep the prices up would be to make the supply miserly, to keep their production at the same levels that they were during the RAM shortage, and then you create artificial scarcity, which keeps the prices up, which is what they're being accused of under these Chinese antitrust laws. And let me tell you, when the Chinese are coming after you with antitrust laws, there's something really fouled up.
Yeah.
But it's estimated that they could be fined between $800 million and $8 billion in fines.
Well,
That's insane.
You make your bed, you gotta lay in it.
But let's face it, most likely they made way, way more than that in the time period. During this time period, they probably made way, way more than that in DRAM sales. And so, let's be honest, do we really think this is going to make a big dent in anything?
No, but I'm kind of glad to see. I don't know. I'm kind of glad to see them getting spanked a little bit, honestly. Because, I mean, let's face it, we're all tech builders, right? We enjoy tinkering and building systems, and video card manufacturers and memory makers have made it very difficult over the last year and a half. It's ridiculous. I'm glad to see the memory makers getting spanked a little bit.
And of course, China has a vested interest in all this because they have several of their own DRAM startups that they want to spin up to be bigger. And so they, whether they actually did in fact collude or not, China has a vested interest in making it look like they did. So,
well, if they do spin up some fabs, that will increase competition, and hopefully the market will keep those prices in check. I mean, the quality of their product might not be there for a generation or two, but they'll eventually get there.
And particularly with China being such a large buyer of electronics to begin with, and being such a large electronics manufacturer besides, that they're going to be buying from home first once they get spun up.
Of course, because they're looking at the long game. right? They're looking at, well, internally our prices are most likely going to be more expensive for a generation or two. But then the more they make, the cheaper it gets, the better they get at it. So, yeah, I mean, it just makes sense that they would do that. Because eventually it will be cheaper for them.
And let's face it, the only computer market that's bigger than the United States is China. And the whole Southeast Asian market, but China in particular.
No, it makes sense. They're an up-and-coming economy. So, yeah, I'm elated. I'm so happy about that.
I'm cautiously optimistic, but we'll see where it goes.
You're fantastic, Ned. You've always got that poker face going on.
Speaking of cautiously optimistic, computer manufacturer or computer accessory manufacturer Corsair, probably most famous for their DRAM, has acquired Elgato Gaming.
What's up with that? Who's Elgato Gaming?
So Elgato is the one who makes some of the most widely used capture devices, such as the Elgato HD, the Elgato 60S, basically capture cards for capturing video game gameplay.
Okay, yeah. Twitch streamers use them a lot.
Yep.
Okay. I'm tracking.
And so Corsair has acquired Elgato Gaming, and I think it's going to be interesting to see what they do with that. And so, I mean,
well, RGB.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yes.
Being Corsair, they're going to RGB all the things.
Yep, they are the RGB king.
We going gangsta on this.
So we are going to see RGB capture cards, I'm sure, in the near future.
Yep.
But yeah, the I was going to say I think the Elgato HD 60S is probably the most commonly used capture card in this day and age, because it can capture 1080p footage at 60 frames a second, which is what every gamer wants in their VODs. And it's just, of course, they've got the newer ones now, like the Elgato 4K, which is designed to handle 4K footage. But for most gamers are still gaming at 1080p. So regardless, Corsair, generally most of the stuff they produce is quality. And I think if they largely let Elgato continue as before, I think it'll be good for both.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see them roll out their 1080p capture bling bling edition.
RGB for RGB speed.
RGB.
With integration with Corsair's IQ software.
Oh my gosh. You had to say IQ.
Yes, ICUE.
ICUE.
Oh, you mean IC? No, not ICX. That's something else.
All right, one last bit of tech news. This just dropped this morning, so this is fresh off the press. This was an exclusive from WCCF Tech about Intel planning to release Core i9 processors for their new Z390 mainstream platform. In particular, leading off with the Core i9 9900K.
So this is interesting, actually, because I want to say Core i9 right now is specific to Extreme Edition.
Yeah,
or their.
It is.
So that pretty much tells me that's probably going to be their 8-core, their heavily rumored 8-core part coming out.
Yeah.
Yeah, according to these leaks from WCCF Tech, the Core i9 9900K is supposed to be the 8-core 16-thread top-of-the-line processor, with the i7 9700K basically being a copy-paste of the 8700K at 6 cores, 12 threads, and the i5 9600K again being a copy paste of the 8600K at 6 cores, 6 threads.
This is interesting because they're moving from. It looks like they're moving from the X99 platform to a Z390 platform. Because the enthusiast grade, the high brand enthusiast i7 blah 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 X was on the X. There was the X99, X299, X399. That's what it seems like this is in the same vein, but it's not on the X motherboards. It's going to be on the Z390 motherboard. So that's going to be interesting.
So they're moving from a heavy duty chipset to a light duty chipset from the sound.
Yeah.
So it'll be minus the quad channel, minus all the PCIe lanes. So, but it's good. And I bet you that'll be loosely followed by Ryzen 2800X.
You are likely not wrong, sir. You are likely not wrong. But what's interesting to me is that Intel is doing this thing where it's going to have 2 chipsets that are basically going to be competing with each other, with the Z370 and the Z390.
So what are they going to do to get people to buy their Z390?
Well, they're offering the 9900K is, I think, going to be the big one. It's going to be the carrot that's going to basically act as the, hey, you want the biggest and best we have on the mainstream platform? You got to have Z390.
Yeah, it's Intel process for you.
Well, they'll have to have like a lot of PCIe lanes and a lot of different components and whatever on their motherboards to make it stand out from the Z370 boards.
But here's the kicker. If you take a look at the Z390 block chipset diagram that leaked with this, it basically looks identical to Z370, except it has support for 2666 memory out of the box. It has 24 PCI Express 3.0 lanes through the chipset. And has 16 that go directly to the processor.
So what, 16 overall? 16 lanes?
So here, I'll screen share this.
I'd be very surprised if they had more than 16 PCIe lanes, to be honest.
So here's the chipset block diagram that's included in the article. You can see that off the processor itself, which notice they're still marking them as 8th gen, even though they're going to be 9000 series. You have either 1x16 PCIe 3.0 lanes, 2x8, or 1x8 and 2x4. So you can have up to 3 PCI Express devices hanging directly off the chip itself, but it has to be either times 16 for a single graphics card, times 8 for 2 graphics cards, or by 8 and then 2x4s for like a single graphics card and 2 PCIe SSDs.
But then off the chipset, 24.
Well, notice it's up to 24.
So, and then your DMI 3.0, whatever type of interface that is, that's going to be your bottleneck. So
DMI 3.0 was actually introduced with Skylake, I think.
Okay.
And so it's the direct media interface, and it's basically how the chipset talks with the CPU. And I don't remember the speed it's at, but it's fast enough that it's usually not a bottleneck.
I would be very skeptical if that is a true. I could see maybe 4 lanes, maybe 8 max coming off the chipset. But you're not going to get a true 32. You're not getting true 32 3.0 lanes. I mean, that would compete directly with their Z. What's their high end quad channel?
The X299 platform.
Yeah, that would compete directly with X299, and that's for the last several generations, PCIe lane has been one of the ways that they've differentiated some of the processors in the stack, right? So they had, they used to have like 6 cores. They would have 2 6-core models. One had more PCIe lanes than the other one, essentially.
Right.
So.
Well, like for example, the Sandy Bridge generation. I remember because I had one of these. The entry-level chip was the 3820, the Core i7 3820. It was a quad-core 8-thread chip that was basically identical to the 2600K in every respect, except it worked on socket X79. Well, technically socket 2011 with the X79 chipset. And then you had, like you said, the 2 6-core variants, which were I'm trying to remember, the Core i7 3930K, which was 6 cores, 12 threads. And then you had the Core i7 3960X, which was, the creme de la creme that was clocked as high as you could go and was fully unlocked for overclocking. And of course, they continued that more or less through the generations to follow. In the Haswell generation, they added an 8-core at the top with the 5960X.
Mm-hmm.
And then the 6950X wound up being a 10-core. And I think that's as high as they went until they launched X299, which has up to the 18-core 7980XE.
That's just crazy. That's what, a $2,000 or $3,000 processor.
I think the official price on the 7980XE is $1,800, but
yeah, that's just crazy. I don't see them going over 16 PCIe lanes personally.
You may be right.
Maybe 20 with the additional peripherals off the chipset, but
I mean, yeah, given that this is going to be the mainstream chipset, that they're not going to. They're going to try and maintain distance between it and the high-end desktop platform.
Mm-hmm.
Because why would you buy the high-end desktop platform if you could just buy Z390 and get the same thing? One thing that Wendell from Level 1 Tech said after Computex really caught my attention, which was in the past, Intel's response has basically been to make their low core count Xeons their consumer line on the mainstream chipset. Then you had your medium core counts, which became the high-end desktop platform for consumers. And then you had the high core count, which stayed pretty much exclusively in the enterprise space. Well, in X299, we saw a shift where the high core count CPUs began to filter into the high-end desktop platform. And now we're starting to see the medium core count filter into the mainstream desktop platform. So we're starting to see blurring between those distinctions that they made in the past.
Well, that's because they had a competitor come out and show that there are markets for that at the consumer level. I mean, consumers are wanting more cores. So, and Threadripper and Ryzen have shown that.
Mm-hmm.
because they're selling like hotcakes.
Mhm.
Speaking of, I know we're over an hour in, but we finally got to our first major topic,
What?
which is Ryzen Threadripper 2.
Ah.
And so that's kind of why I wanted to put the Core i9 right before this, is because there's been a lot of information leak as of late about what is being called the Ryzen Threadripper 2990X, which, according to the available rumors, is a 32-core Threadripper chip. With
Immersing.
a maximum TDP of 250 watts and a CPU clock of 3.4 gigahertz on 32 cores.
That's
That's
insane.
crazy. So I assume they're gonna probably follow the same or a similar manufacturing philosophy that they had with first gen Threadripper, where they took the top 5% of all of their Threadripper stock material, whatever you call it, or bins, and make them Threadripper CPUs, basically.
Pretty much. The main difference is that in the first generation Threadripper chips, the 1920 and the 1950X, basically you only had 2 of the CCXs on the chip active. The other 2s were dummies.
Yep.
And so that's why it topped out at 16 cores, because they basically had 2 Zeppelin dies, 2 CCXs of 8 cores apiece, topping out at 16 cores. Well, now they're going to bring in, for the second generation of Threadripper, there's not going to be any dummy dies. It's going to be all 4 active Zeppelin dies. Or Zeppelin Plus dies, I should say. Now, for reference, the AMD EPIC, which is their enterprise line of processors, 7601 is the 32-core, 64-thread enterprise version of this similar CPU. It has a 2.2 gigahertz base clock, a 2.7 gigahertz all-core boost speed, and a 3.2 gigahertz maximum boost clock at 180 watt TDP. So if this has a 3.4 gigahertz boost clock with a 4 gigahertz single core boost, as has been rumored, then 250 watt TDP is not all that outlandish.
No, but those TDP ratings are always. I don't put much stock in those. I mean, they're good to get kind of a general idea, but there's going to be workloads where those processors hit 350.
Oh,
maybe
easily.
more, 400.
I mean, we've seen even with the X299 platform, where the i7-7980XE will hit 500, 600 watts under load.
I could believe it.
So, the thing is, the way AMD defines TDP is their official definition for TDP is the thermal dissipation necessary to run the processor under commercial software at load, which is basically a meaningless phrase that says we run it through a particular batch of tests, and whatever comes out of that test is what we call the TDP.
Well, I consider that better than Intel's rating, because Intel just takes their TDP at idle. I'm pretty sure. Which
I'm not sure about that. I do know Intel has been called out as of late for the way it abuses its TDP ratings.
Well, look at with the non-K variant of their i7, of their current 6-core.
Yeah.
People get a $20 tower cooler you know, like a Hyper 212 or a GAMX 400, and they're seeing boost speeds that are several hundred megahertz above the stock cooler. And I wonder why.
Well, it's mostly because the Intel stock cooler is garbage to begin with. But
Yep. Yep.
So according to this, or according to the article I'm reading here, this is from Tech Report. Their source says that it will clock all the way up to 4.2 gigahertz boost using XFR.
So they're using sounds like they're using XFR / precision boost algorithms that are pretty native to Zen Plus. Maybe even more, maybe even slightly more aggressive. That's interesting. I can't wait to see that thing when it comes out. I can't wait to read reviews on that sucker.
And, well, for what it's worth, their source, who is apparently a high-end overclocker in Hong Kong, was able to get Cinebench scores on the 2990X. The highest score he achieved was 6,399 CB in Cinebench.
Oof.
For comparison, an Intel Core i9-7900X gets 2,184 CB in Cinebench.
That's crazy. That's crazy. Because I ran Cinebench on the 2700X here. I don't remember the speeds or the scores I was getting. I want to say it was slightly south of 2000.
Yeah,
maybe 1600 range, 1700 range, somewhere in there.
Yeah, that sounds about right. The thing with Cinebench is you have to make sure that you're loading up all your threads, which some of the lighter Cinebench workloads don't load up all Horizon's threads. Most of them, I think the standard test does, but some of the custom tests don't.
I know the OpenGL one doesn't.
Yeah. So let's see. The couple other articles here that talks about some of the information that's out there. WCCF Tech posted earlier today, excuse me, about the 2990X. It's going to be on the X399 high-end desktop platform. And estimated cost for the 2990X, $1,500 US.
Well, it's going to be a lot, but when you put that in comparison with the direct Intel competitor, I'm sure it'll be pretty considerably less. Because I want to say, isn't the 16-core Threadripper the 1950X? What was that?
It was originally $999, but I think it's dropped in price now to it's like $799. I've seen it on sale for right around $800.
Which, you know, from a platform perspective, it's going to cost you quite a bit, right? But when you look at its direct Intel competitor, there's probably two SKUs that will come out, like the 18 core, and then there's another one. The 18 core is what, $1,500?
So the i9-7980XE is their 18 core 36 thread flagship CPU on the high end desktop. It is an almost $2,000 processor. I think it's $1,799 officially.
Yeah. So there's going to be things that Threadripper does a little better. I know that you get more PCIe lanes and some other features. But when you take the Intel platform costs into perspective, you can get into a Threadripper for considerably less.
Oh yeah, definitely.
That's amazing, though. 32 cores.
And 64 threads.
Yeah.
It's insane.
They're also the leaked details indicate 16 megabytes of L2 cache, 64 megabytes of L3 cache. I mean, basically what you're getting here is a mid-grade server chip that could easily handle most workstation loads and could, by and large, if you wanted to run a home server off a consumer desktop platform, you just about could with this.
Mm.
And the thing is, the 32-core 7601 EPYC that they're generally saying this is likely based off of, that was originally designed for dual and quad socket systems.
Oh, yeah.
So quad channel memory. Probably talking to... So how do they do that? They probably speak... So you probably have one dual channel bank speaking to one CCX, and then, you know, another dual channel bank on the other side speaking to the other CCX, and then I imagine the third and fourth CCX is probably get memory allocation through the Infinity fabric. So I'm going to be interested in seeing how people tune these for different kinds of workloads.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see. I don't know exactly which CCXs get loaded up with which memory. But given that there's 4 CCXs, it actually wouldn't surprise me if they get assigned, like each CCX gets a bank of RAM.
Which that could be good or bad, depending on the workload.
And
I mean, you're gonna have latency. So, just imagine it. I can't even imagine, just from a general computing standpoint, how I would even load that processor down. I mean, you could be gaming, ripping one or two videos in the background and streaming, and still not even hit 100% CPU usage.
How many cores would that fill up?
Well,
because gaming is usually single core.
Well, it depends on the game.
Oh yeah.
For modern games like Tom Clancy's Ghost Recon Wildlands, it will use 8+ threads.
Jeez.
If you let it. I've noticed on my 1800X that game will push my 1800X over 50 to 60%. So it's using minimum 8 threads.
Mm-hmm.
And that's not with not that high end of GPU. I'm running a pair of RX 480s. So
can you overclock those to 580 stock?
I could. I'd probably have to undervolt them first.
Yeah. Which is a weird concept to me, to undervolt to get a higher clock speed.
Yeah.
When I'm so used to saying people saying you have to increase the voltage to increase the threshold of the overclock to get higher overclocks, like we talked about last time, of it not being the case for AMD.
Well, undervolting's been around for a while, but yeah, when you think about it logically, like you're saying, it does make more sense to you apply more voltage, you get more gigahertz or megahertz out of it.
Yeah.
But undervolting's been around for a while, mainly just for tuning.
Is that because the voltage is higher than normal when out of the box, and then you undervolt it?
Well, use cases could be you're in a situation where you want to use a smaller power envelope, or maybe you don't have enough cooling. Or fine tuning, even like maybe you just want to stay at a certain speed on your processor all the time, and you want to fine tune how much power it's consuming.
That makes sense.
But it is interesting when you're increasing performance and undervolting. Like with the Vega 56, for example. And you're getting more performance. So they're undervolting, but then overclocking the HBM2.
Yeah.
You're getting into some very granular tuning at that point.
Speaking of tuning, another source, this one from OC3D.net, found appearances of the THREADRIPPER 2990X in the 3D Mark database. According to them, it shows the 2990X is a 32-core processor with a stock voltage of, or a stock clock of 3000 megahertz with a max turbo core clock of 3.792 megahertz, or 3.9792 gigahertz, which doesn't match exactly with what we've seen elsewhere, but would make sense given what we've seen of Ryzen in the past. It notes that it has 1 physical and 64 logical processors with 32 cores.
I can't wait to see some of the custom cooling kits they get for these.
And it looks like, in particular, this particular entry was equipped with 64 gigabytes of RAM. So,
wow. 64 gigs of RAM.
So yeah, and this would line up with previous rumors about the 24-core being called the 2970X and the 32-core being called the 2990X.
Have either of you ever played with an NHD 15 or a similar size cooler?
No.
Air cooler?
I've seen it.
That's the Noctua 140 millimeter cooler, right?
Yeah, the two tower.
And it's
two tower, two fan.
Yep. It's just a big, massive, honking air cooler, and it's very, very good.
I saw Jay's 2 cents do a video on that, and he was just like floored on how good it is compared to his custom loop. He's like, am I just going to go to air cooling now? Because it's not fair. And he's the custom liquid cool king, basically.
Yeah, he's been water cooling forever.
Yeah.
It's sorry. I had an NHD 15 on my FX 8320.
Jeez.
And I had that overclocked from 3.5 to 4.6 as an everyday driver for a couple of years.
Wow.
And that thing stayed cool all the time. And
What was the RPM of the fans?
Well, so I had them in a PWM mode. I just left them at their stock setting. Okay. And I never saw them go above 900 RPM. So I had two fans on it. You know, just the stock Noctua fans, which are really good. They're not the prettiest things in the world, but
yeah, I don't know why they had to go with tan and brown color fans that nobody really wants in their case. Nobody wants to show off in their case.
Yeah, but the amount of engineering they do with those fans is just unreal.
Well, they did the. Well, yeah, I'm not going to rabbit trail again.
Yeah, I don't know what the TDP of that cooler is, but I've got to imagine that whatever coolers are designed to cool Threadripper 2, they're going to be bigger than that.
It'd have to be because the chip is huge.
Yeah,
It's bigger than a regular.
I remember when Noctua had to make special TR4 socket versions of their CPU coolers just so that the CPU block portion of that air cooler could actually fit on the Threadripper die.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Or on the Threadripper IHS.
Yeah.
Which I want to say is slightly bigger dimensionally than a credit card.
It's about the same size, yeah.
Is it?
Yeah.
Okay. That's crazy.
Yeah.
Yeah, you had to get the special, you had to get the NHD 15 TR4 edition for it to work correctly with the TR4 sockets.
I was shocked to see how it slides into the motherboard. You lift up the holder latch, and then it has another like rail slider, and you slide the whole CPU in with the thing it sits on, the orange thing it sits on, and then put it down. It's like, dang, that's higher than the Intel's socket that has two holding brackets, the holding arms.
Yeah, go ahead, sorry.
That configuration is something you'd normally see in a server socket.
Yeah, yeah.
You know it's heavy duty when they're including a torque wrench with the retail box.
Right?
Yep, yep.
Got a torque now. That's crazy. And that NHD 15 is essentially the same cooler. And it cools Threadripper just fine.
Yep. So moving from AMD to their graphics card rival, NVIDIA, we have rumblings, various bits of news that indicate that even though they may not have a compelling market reason to do so, NVIDIA may soon be debuting their Turing class of GeForce GPUs.
I'm talking 1180?
That's what everyone's assuming it's going to be named right now. And most of the leaks point to it being named that.
That does go in line with their naming scheme of the previous cards. They went from 7, 8, I mean, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and then 10 series. I don't know. I don't see why they would go from 10 to 20.
Because 20 is big.
Yeah, but it just wouldn't make sense with the naming scheme unless they're going from 20 to 21 to 22 to 23 on up.
No, I imagine they would do the 10 series, then you have the 20 series, the 30, the 40, the 50.
And they've had 3 or 4 different architectures leaked. Architecture names leaked. They've got to be breaking a record by now.
Yeah.
I mean, we've had Volta in the Titan V and the Tesla V100 for almost 2 years now, even though that we've still had Pascal on the consumer end for those same 2 years. And so for them to skip to Turing indicates either that they don't see a need to bring Volta down to the consumer level, or it could just be, as this Gadgets 360 article points out, that they're just responding to the fact that they kind of blew it on Bitcoin mining, and they're stuck with an inventory of excess GPUs.
Bitcoin mining. I really want AMD to come out with a part to compete with their 80 level. That's compelling.
Yeah, they tried to do that with the Vega 64, but they clocked it too high. They made it run too hot, and it wasn't able to compete.
It was disappointing.
Yeah, and then the prices soared because they romper stomped compute with Bitcoin mining.
Yeah.
So
That's been the big advantage Radeon's had, is their compute performance is better in the type of workloads that are best suited for mining.
right.
Yeah.
So, according to this Gadgets 360 article, NVIDIA has overestimated pent-up gaming demand and underestimated the impact of the declining market in mining demand. How badly have they miscalculated? Enough to agree to take back 300,000 GPUs from a top 3 Taiwan OEM. To be a top 3 Taiwan OEM means almost certainly it's Asus, Gigabyte, or MSI.
I wonder if they're
Maybe-
gonna. I wonder if they're gonna sell them for a reasonable price. And I mean, flooding the gaming market with reasonably priced. The only thing is, mining cards are sketchy on how long they'll last and how good they are because of amount of 24/7 operation.
So if you want my money, and this is my bet, because we've seen both of these companies do this in the past. If anyone remembers the 8800 GT, the 9800 GT, and the GTS 250,
Yeah, I had a 9800 GT.
then it would not surprise me to see, say, the GTX 1160 basically be the same chip as the GTX 1080, remarketed as the mid-range solution with maybe GDDR6.
Gotcha.
Because that's exactly what they did with the 8800 GT, or the 8800 GTX to the 8800 GT to the GTS 250.
Well, the
Gotcha.
GTX, the GTX 770 was just a rebrand of the 680.
That's true.
And it's still a fine part. I mean, it still performed well. In fact, I know a couple of guys that still run the 4 gig variants, and they're perfectly fine at 1080p.
Yeah, the GTX 770 still has performance comparable to a 1050 Ti. So,
Yep,
so
or
yeah,
right
it
around a
would not
970.
surprise me at all to see NVIDIA take these 300,000 GPUs they've bought back and then just remarket them as the mid-range card for the 1100 generation, while they focus on building up their stocks for the 1170 and 1180.
Well, my money's on AMD though. Maybe not to be, competing with the 80 part, but I think they'll have something very compelling.
Yeah, we talked a little bit last week about how Navi is suffering a bit of an identity crisis, given that rumor has it was originally developed for the PS5, but that it's likely that AMD is probably going to release that part as a mid-range successor to the RX 580, at least on the consumer desktop market.
Well, if the recent past is anything to consider, of the 1060 and the 480/580 were at least at 980 performance or slightly better in some workloads or some cases.
Yeah.
So that basically would kind of dictate if they follow a similar performance curve, which, considering how much time has passed since Pascal released, 2 years, it's not unrealistic to think that mid-range part would be right around a 1080 in terms of performance, maybe slightly better, and consume less power.
Mm-hmm.
So if that's the case, I'll easily upgrade to that. It'd be nice to have an all AMD system again.
Mm-hmm.
That's what I'm kind of hoping for.
So one of the other things that is being pushed as evidence of new GPUs soon from both NVIDIA and AMD is the fact that Micron has begun volume production of GDDR6 high-performance memory. And considering that there's basically no GPUs out now that use GDDR6, it stands to reason that you're not going to begin volume production unless you have something to put it on.
Mm-hmm. We're just going to ramp up a bunch of memory production and not put it in anything.
Yeah, from the same company that's been that the Chinese believe have been keeping RAM prices high for the last 3 years.
Yeah. Well, I think GDDR6 is going to be used by both companies, especially considering how AMD kind of got burned a little bit with HBM2 pricing. From what I've read and heard, HBM2 just kind of soared when they were expecting HBM2 to decline in price.
Yep.
I mean, it's a great performing product. It's just there's a number of things that are inherently flawed about HBM2. I don't know what its successors will be like, and I know that they're going to use HBM in data centers and stuff like that. But just looking at two things, namely with HBM, how they had that issue with the third-party cards having to vary the coolers a little bit because
because
they
the
had
variable heights.
Yeah. So they had I don't remember the reason why, but some of the memory stack heights were different in the exact same part. So like you'd have a Vega 56 that had memory that was slightly higher than the next one. Well, when you're cooling and you're trying to build cards in volume, that is a considerable challenge because you've got to make alterations to your GPU block on a card by card basis, just about. And then when you consider like the price of HBM2 memory increasing over a product life cycle for the card, I mean, you go back to your design. I think when you're designing your part like that, you're considering a certain price point. So they're looking at a 70 part competing at a $400 price point. You know, that I'm sure that ate quite a bit into their profit margin. So
Yeah, that's the big problem with HBM and HBM2 is that it has to be on the same interposer as the die it's connected to, which leads to exactly the problem you're talking about, where you have variable heights
yeah.
within, where the HBM stacks are not the exact same height as the GPU die, and so that means that sometimes you have air gaps, and sometimes that you had to apply excessive amounts of thermal paste to even out the heights, or you have to use shims, and that's just bad all around.
Yeah, and that you don't get that problem with GDDR5. I assume you won't have that problem with DDR6. So,
well, if the early examples that have been caught pictures of so far turn out to be correct, you're probably right. Someone over at Tweaktown got a look at a next generation NVIDIA card that was not identified, but it had a new GPU die that had not been seen before, and around the GPU die were 12 modules of Micron GDDR6.
so 12 gigs of RAM.
Well,
how big was the G? Did they say were there any GPU die measurements?
well, I can show you the picture. I don't think there was any measurements. Let me screen share again.
Because that can kind of give that could kind of tell you a little bit.
So this is the one picture they were allowed to make. The board in question had 3 PCIe 8-pin connectors.
3.
And 12 modules of Micron Superfast GDDR6.
3 8-pin connectors.
So
That's
there's
crazy.
some arguing that it could be a new Tesla GPU accelerator based on the Turing architecture. There's others arguing that maybe this is, the next GeForce card.
Oh my gosh, there's no way they release even like a mid-range high-end part that's going to have 3 8-pin connectors. Oh my gosh, that would totally throw out their design philosophy for like the last 3 generations. That's
true, but
that can't be. That's either like basic engineering sample PCB or like you're saying, like a non-consumer grade.
the fact that it has the fact that right up here it has the NVLink connectors is what indicates to me this is probably a data center card.
That would make sense.
Plus,
look at the fans on that thing, man. That thing looks like it's made for some heavy industrial work.
It's like 92mm fans or something.
Yeah, like I'm going to work in the factory.
60.
Yeah. So what we do know is that the new consumer card is supposed to be a heavily refined version of Pascal called Ampere.
Pascal refresh.
While the GPU to succeed Volta is supposed to be the Turing. At least that's what the current rumor mill says. On the other hand, NVIDIA the other day celebrated the birthday of Alan Turing, who's considered to be the basically father or pioneer of computer science. And they celebrated his birthday, which was on June 23rd.
That's kind of cool.
They tweeted, "Happy birthday to Alan Turing, the remarkable pioneer of computer science," with a link back to their website, which is interesting because since their next generation of GPUs is supposed to be based on the Turing architecture, it could very well mean that they're going to be announcing both the GTX 1180 and whatever their next Turing GPU is going to be on July 30th. Is the rumor about when they're supposed to be announcing their next GPUs.
I'm just so ready for the rumor cycle to be done. We've been on. I mean, the stuff we've got's nice, but we've had it for 2 years.
Right.
It'd be nice to see something new. Finally.
I mean, we will know for sure in about a month. But until then, unfortunately, all we have is the continual rumor cycle to go off of.
Yeah.
And speaking of the rumor cycle, our last article that I have here is from TechRadar. It was published 2 days ago. And apparently the latest whispers on the grapevine point to next-gen GPUs shipping in late August or early September.
Okay. So they would. Sounds like they'd either do a paper launch.
That's certainly possible. I mean, I could see them doing a paper launch in late August with actual units shipping in early September. They've done that before.
Yeah, but the nice thing about when the RX 480 launched and the GTX 1080, when both of those parts launched, they actually had stock in the stores.
Yes,
if I remember right. So I kind of like to see them follow suit with that. Where they say, okay, well, here's the part. You can go to the store and buy it. They'll be sold out, of course. But
further adding to the rumor mill is the fact that the rumored GPU GTX 1180 is supposed to offer faster performance than a Titan XP with 3,584 CUDA cores, 16 gigabytes of GDDR6 VRAM, and a floating point 32, an FP32 or floating point 32-bit performance of 13 teraflops, which the GTX 1080, when it launched, had an 8.7 teraflop FP32 performance.
What was the 980 Ti? Was it around there?
Let me check.
I don't remember.
980 Ti FP32. So the 980 Ti according to a Nantech who evaluated the card for pure compute performance, the 980 Ti is second only to the original GTX Titan X. In particular, its FP32 performance. It promised FP32 performance of...
I want to say the 1080 was better. Not by much, but it was.
Yeah, it was. Okay, yeah, it approximately 7.5 teraflops. So yes.
So it was ballpark, but it was better.
Yeah.
So I could see if we see a similar performance gain, that would actually be pretty impressive. Hopefully the price isn't reflective of that. Hopefully the price is less, meaning it's not as expensive as a 1080 Ti. But I guess we'll have to wait and see.
Let's see. Here we go. So yeah, the closest thing they had to measuring floating point 32 performance was folding at home. This is from an Antec. They used folding at home bench, which is the official benchmark from the folding at home, which Stanford University uses basically people's excess GPU power to calculate protein folding to try and find the cure for certain protein-based diseases.
Yeah.
Which it actually uses your CPU now too.
Yeah, you can
along
set
with
it
your
to do that
GPU
as well. At the time when they tested it, and this was in 2015, so 3 years ago, at the time, the GTX 980 Ti was capable of 75.1 nanoseconds per day, which apparently, using the OpenCL path for rendering, put it just behind the original Titan X. And let's see, comparable for the GTX 1080. So if we look at the GTX 1080 in comparison, sorry, I'm doing this all on the fly.
No problem.
So in Nantech, when they evaluated compute on, well, this is from their GTX 1080 Ti article. from their review, when they reviewed compute on that card, they compared it to using the same test. Oh, they didn't use the same test. They'd switched their results, but in comparison, the 1080. Okay, so they did Luxmark for both. The GTX 980 Ti got 3,343 in Luxmark, whereas the 1080 got 3,648. The 1080 Ti got 5,288 in that same bench.
Okay.
So,
well,
if the GTX 1180 delivers on better than Titan XP performance, then it should perform even better than the 1080 Ti.
Pretty impressive. That just screams dollars, though.
Yeah. There's some of the estimates I've seen estimate that this is going to be closer to $1,000 card than a $700 one.
That's crazy.
Mm.
That's just crazy.
So, that brings us to the end of our topics that we have for this week. And, wow, we're at almost 2.5 hours at this point. So, so just to kind of wrap up, if you were to get your hands on, say, a GTX 1180, or if we'll assume AMD comes up with an equivalent, what would you do with it?
play video games.
Seems kind of obvious, but
I would upgrade. I would probably at least upgrade to 1440p panels or a singular 30-ish inch 4K, but I'd be saving for a while.
Indeed.
What would you do? What would you guys do?
Oh, honestly, I'd probably set it up in its own system. And when I'm not at home, it'd probably be running folding at home all day, because I used to run a folding at home rig specifically just for that. This is how old that was. At the time, that system was running a pair of GTX 460s.
Nice.
Not RX 460s, GTX 460s. So those were hot and loud Fermi cards. But I tell you what, for the about a year that I did that, I wound up I wound up folding over 3.5 million points worth of protein folds.
Jeez.
So
that's impressive.
And that was basically letting it run day and night nonstop.
Dang.
That's impressive. I don't know. I guess I might turn my hand at mining.
There's some coins out there that it'd still be efficient enough to do.
Yeah. Well, I'd have to think of a home for my GTX 1060. Could see maybe slapping together some cheap ITX.
You could make a LAN box with that.
Yeah. I don't know. That's a good question. I'm too selfish to do some folding at home for other people's benefit. What would you do, Hunter?
On one hand, I would liquid cool it, of course, with hard tubing, if money was no object, and like RGB the craziness, and then take it to a LAN party, or slap it in a sleeper build and take it to a LAN party. I'm like, I have this crappy computer. All I can afford is a pre-built, and then blow away. Probably have a. When I went to QuakeCon in Dallas. When it was in Dallas, it changed to, it might still be in Dallas, but it's at a different hotel than the Anatole. Somebody brought in a 50-inch TV. I don't know how they got around the, I guess they bought two, because you can go to the BYOC. It's a huge LAN party. It's a LAN party. It's basically QuakeCon is a LAN party and an E3 in one.
Oh gosh.
So, yeah, so it's a huge room, and they had, I think, maybe 2,000 people for the bring your own computer LAN party. And somebody walked in with a 50-inch TV. I'm like, how are you able to do that? Probably bought like two. He probably bought like two seats, because you can only have like a, I guess at the most, a 27-inch monitor, one 27-inch monitor per seat, because you have only a square. So
how do you bring a 50-inch monitor into a massive LAN party?
And it wasn't even for the console area. It was for legitimately his PC area.
I mean, why would you
is
even
insane.
need a 50-inch TV as a monitor? I
To
mean,
show off. It's the same. It's the same thing that somebody brought in four monitors and turned it vertically to make one screen, but kind of like Crossfire, or like Crossfire Infinity used to be.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I
So
can
I saw
sort
that
of
there.
that I can actually sort of understand. Because if you want to have a true surround experience, okay, yeah, I get that.
Yeah.
But I know I've tried to use like 32-inch monitors before and just found them way too big for my eye to track on.
And they're also really slow response time. The lag on them are really bad. I've looked into it because I have a 50-inch 4K TV, and I was thinking of building a computer to run on it, even though I can't quite see the text on a huge screen like that, because you're sitting too far away to see the text for games. At least for me, it's bad for me. But yeah,
So I went to a LAN party a couple of years back, and this guy had, because I'm kind of a fan of like sleeper stuff, or just the super practical guy.
Yeah.
You know, who doesn't have a ton of money, but this guy had one of the cooler setups I'd ever seen. Not that I see a lot of DIY stuff, but he had just like a $50 case with an acrylic window. I want to say it was a Cooler Master case. It was a Mid-Tower ATX, just like a little Skylake i5, I think, or Haswell. No, it was a Devil's Canyon i5, and he had a little 120 mil AIO, and he had a Maxwell. He had a Maxwell 970 or 980, and he had a little 20-inch 1080p monitor stuck to the side of it. So all he had to do was flip it around, and
nice.
He had a Velcro strap, and then it had hinges on the top, but then he had a Velcro strap for his monitor and his mouse and his headset. And he just basically put it down on the table, flipped it around. You know, he plugged it in. He plugged the LAN cable and all that stuff in, and undid the Velcro strap, and he had his monitor and everything right there. It was the coolest thing I'd ever seen. I mean, it was just, you know, in less than a few minutes, he was up and gaming, and then he left the same way.
Very cool.
Yeah.
Well, gentlemen, it has been a pleasure this evening, but I'm afraid we must bring this all to a close. I'd like to thank you all for joining us this evening on the CrossForge Gaming Podcast for TechForge. Any of you all have any last thoughts, last words, anything you'd like to leave our audience with?
My brain hurt.
Okay, yeah, I realize it's late when we're recording, so that might not be the best thing to ask. But anyway, in that case, I've been Dynamo Ned, and this has been Jason and Hunter. And
Yep.
thank you all for watching, and forge on, humans.
Forge
Yep.
on.
Forge on.